So I'm Ian Gordon. I was a gillie here on the River Spey for like 25 years and then got into road building and designing salmon roads and salmon lines and that kind of stuff. I've worked for some fairly big companies, probably some of the biggest companies in the business. I'm now doing a range of tackle for a company called Cadence, and really excited about that. So I organise fishing holidays and trips for groups of people and host these trips here in Scotland and in Iceland, Norway, Canada. So it's all good fun, Stuart. Really great fun. Yeah, the people are going to say, what the hell is he fishing with a small fly like that? The one the guy's got on down there. So just that one. So we're standing right in a place called the Cobble Pot, which is in a beat called Arndilly on the River Spey here. So the River Spey is probably the premier salmon fishing river in Scotland. The guys on the Tweed would say different to that, you know, as they would in the Tay. But the Spey is a fantastic river, and like all rivers in Scotland, the population of salmon have definitely declined since I started work here. I started fishing as a boy here in the early 70s when I was just a wee nipper, and I started working here in the mid 80s, and the fish were beginning to go into decline around the mid 80s, late 80s, certainly through the 90s, and in the 2000s they've declined a lot, you know. So I mean, roughly I would say that now there's probably 20% maximum of what there were in the mid 80s. That's all we've got now, you know. And there's a number of reasons for that. I think the biggest reason is probably man himself, his lack of understanding, and because of the lack of understanding, a lack of good management. And I think that's been some of the biggest problems, or it creates some of the biggest problems that the salmon now have. The fact that politics has moved on dramatically in that period of time as well means that predators, which were once dealt with regard to salmon, now cannot be dealt with. So we have to come up with different scenarios, and hopefully we can get on top of that as well. But it's understanding the problem, I think, and it's understanding the key problems, Stuart, I think is the main thing, you know. The key thing for salmon is food in the ocean. So the key feature is that there needs to be plenty of food for when the salmon leave the rivers. So that's food this size, small food, you know, that will just, you know, larvae. And that's where we talked earlier on, herring. Herring used to be abundant around the coastline of the UK. And that was a species that all species relied on around the UK, and since the herring get fished out, so the salmon which come out into the ocean as little things like this, they themselves become prey, you know. And so it's that cycle that gets upset when one species is taken out of the ecosystem, and that of course is affected by the climate. Of that there's no doubt, but it's also affected by man. And again, Stuart, it comes back to the lack of understanding of how these things all join up, you know. I think it's all very well throwing money at something. You have to be throwing the money at the right thing, you know. And for me, at this moment in time, the rivers, in my opinion, aren't producing what they did in the past. So basically, what you had as I talked, you asked me a few minutes ago about where did I catch my first salmon. It was in a small river called the Yugi, and it was just a tiny little river that would have probably had no more than 1,500 salmon in it. But that 1,500 salmon at one time, and this is the very good old days, would have produced lots of smolts like this. Now that smolts, when they go to the sea, their defence mechanism is a bait ball, you know. So they have smolts from this river, from that river, so you had big bait balls at that time. Now the bait balls got smaller. It's a lot smaller than it used to be. So that fish become vulnerable. So I think predation from avian predators such as gooseanders. Gooseanders are, in my opinion, a key species here to be speaking about, and that's something that we can do something around because they're a non-native species. They were only here in the UK. The first sightings of them were in the 1880s, and then they were protected after about the 1950s. But from the 1880s to the 1950s, these birds were taken care of. So by taken care of, I mean they were shot. Because they were a non-native bird that turned up here in the UK of their own accord. But from the 1950s till now, their numbers have dramatically increased. So I think that's something that the government should be paying a wee bit more attention to, and certainly the government scientists. There's a bit of a breakdown, I think, between the scientific community and the people that are on the ground, like myself. I think there's a big breakdown, and there has been for some time. So the information that the Scottish Government are working on is not necessarily the right information. And obviously we've got politics at work as well, you know. There's always some of that, Stuart, you know. So from here, as an adult salmon, so you've got your pair of salmon in an ideal situation, but it's not a pair of salmon. It's salmon flourish when they're in abundance. They're a shoal beast. They need to be abundant for them to carry on being abundant, you know. And what happens is you've got this notion of two salmon, a male and a female. So they come together, and the eggs are laid usually around October, November. You know, so the eggs hatch out at sort of March, April time, depending on temperature of the water. They then come out of the gravel with like a yolk sac, and that yolk sac keeps the young alvin fed for maybe a few weeks. So again, and here's where your climate is massively important. A lot of people miss it, but these eggs, when the fish are using the yolk sac, if you have really cold weather at that time and you don't have feeding in the river, then that can kill off so many small fish, you know, right at the very start of their life. If you have good weather at that time, and so you have good feeding, then they get a boost, you know. So they then go to fry stage. So you go a fish like this size, like not even a fingerling, and for 2 years they stay in the river as what we call par, and then they turn silver as small fish like this. They turn silver, and they all turn silver at the same time and go to the sea at the same time. And the reason for that is the bait ball. They all go roughly at the same time so that they converge in the sea, and then they become a big shoal. They take off and they follow food. And that's all they're doing. All they're doing is following food. People seem to think that they go from A to B. They don't. They just follow. Wherever the food is, they follow. And the problem with doing that is if they themselves can become predated upon, you know. So then they spend, if we're talking about a grilse is a fish, a salmon that's went out of the river like this, a fish of this size, and it's went out of the river in May and June, and it comes back, having spent one winter at sea, comes back the following May, June, July or August, and it'll be a fish of maybe between 2.5 and sort of 7 pounds in weight, you know, after 1 year. Once they get to the sea, they're really hard feeders. They grow really, really quickly, or they'll spend 2 winters at sea. So they'll not come back after 1 year, and they'll spend 2 winters at sea, and instead of being 7, 8 pounds, they're going to be like 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 pounds. Some of them spend 3 winters at sea before coming back. They're the really big ones. Now, they were the ones that were here in the past. We had plenty of them. When I take my clients to Norway, for instance, that's what they're chasing. 3 sea winter fish, big ones. Fish of maybe 10, 12, 15 kilos in weight, you know, so 30 pounds in weight. And if you're really lucky, you'll maybe get a 50 pounder as well. Sometimes, you know, they are the ones that have spent like 4 years at sea. So it's an amazing species, but it's also an indicator species. So it's an indicator that because of its long migration and the long time that it stays in the sea, it's telling us as human beings, it's giving us the indication whether the sea is in a good state or not, you know. And for me, the salmon right at this moment is telling us, wait a minute guys, something's wrong. Something's wrong here. You know, something's out of balance, because naturally we would have many, many more salmon of 3 sea winters here. It's now most common 2 sea winters, and quite a lot where we just have 1. Back in the 80s we had a fantastic spell of what we call grilse fishing, Stuart. Grilse were just this 1 sea winter fish. Now I know for a fact if there's loads of acorns in a tree, you know, it's the tree's telling you something. It's saying, well, I have to reproduce here, there's something not quite right, you know. Some people would say, well, it's just quite a nice spring, but salmon are definitely this indicator species. All the signs are there. We can learn so much from salmon, but we don't know enough about them yet. But like I was saying to you about my links to with my grandfather and my uncle and all these guys who were sea fishermen, they really understood the sea, and they, as a young boy, they can tell me, they say, oh, how does he not see this and how do they not see that, you know. If you take one species out, if you make the trawler too big and you completely kill one area of one species, another species will come in and that'll completely change the ecosystem, and you have to then, or us as man, have to then go back and understand this ecosystem from start again, from scratch.